Hello and welcome to Africa Speaks. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. Today is the 6th of December 2014, and today our major focus is going to be, of course, on the case that was dropped by the ICC regarding President Uhuru Kenyatta's charges. And in studio, we're going to be speaking to Tom Maliti, who is a veteran journalist and also very knowledgeable when it comes to international criminal court matters. And we also have Ngunjiri Wambugu, who is a political commentator, going to be analyzing some of these issues regarding the case and also what happens to the victims of post-election violence. But first, yesterday marked 1 year since the death of Nelson Mandela, the very first black South African president. And that is, of course, what he's most known for is the fact that he spent 27 years in prison, and then he's termed as so many different things. He's an icon, he's a father, he's a grandfather, and all that. So let's just take a look at what people were up to on social media yesterday. Africa has shared their memories of Nelson Mandela by recalling lessons they learned from the iconic leader. On the first anniversary of his death, Nelson Mandela was elected South Africa's first black president after spending nearly 3 decades in prison. Social media has been awash with tweets under the hashtags Remembering Mandela, Remember Mandela, among others.
I think we're beginning to acknowledge that we didn't do enough to reckon with our past, and specifically we made it too easy for white South Africans to forget their role in what was a crime against humanity.
Maria Under on Twitter says, "A good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination." That is a quote from Nelson Mandela under the same hashtag. Canada's Foreign Minister and Member of Parliament for Ottawa West, John Baird, while it has now been 1 year since Nelson Mandela's death, his inspirational life will be remembered for many years. Brendan Nell from South Africa says, "Today we salute Madiba, forever an icon, forever human, forever a leader, forever my president." Now, following the dropping of the charges against President Uhuru Kenyatta, there have been mixed reactions. Some are jubilant and some are saying, now what exactly happens to the post-election violence victims? And according to the state of the evidence in this case, Fatou Bensouda, who is the ICC prosecutor, said she had no alternative but to withdraw the charges against President Kenyatta, and she filed a notice to withdraw the charges. But now let's just take a look at the very fast response that President Kenyatta had before we can get into the discussion. Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda has withdrawn charges against Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta at the International Criminal Court. And she says, in light of the Trial Chamber 3's decision on prosecution application for a further adjournment, the prosecution withdrew the charges against Uhuru Kenyatta. And she said that the evidence had not improved to a point where President Kenyatta's alleged criminal responsibility could be proven beyond reasonable doubt. Fatou Bensouda, however, noted that the notice for withdrawal was subject to possibility of bringing new charges at a later date in case the prosecution obtained sufficient evidence. In her words, and I quote, "This withdrawal is without prejudice to the possibility of bringing new charges against Mr. Kenyatta at a later date based on the same or similar factual circumstances should the prosecution obtain sufficient evidence to support such a course of action."
As they say, 1 down, 2 to go. We're nearly there. And I'm sure that they will also do their part to engage.
President Kenyatta said he was excited over the prosecution's decision to drop the charges. And 1 down, 2 to go. I think that is where the starting point should be. Ngunjiri, 1 down, 2 to go. What do you make out of that?
I think it's the only response the president will come up with, because he's president. The argument about the ICC being unfair, a lot of the arguments that he's used to fight for, to defend himself against his case, tend to actually expand into the case one for William Ruto and Joshua Sang. So, one, as president; two, the fact that they are part of one government; three, they basically came together around the issue of ICC, means that he can be excited about the fact that his case is over. But then he cannot either, especially by perception, to be seen to be completely overjoyed when his deputy is still at the ICC. It's bad politics.
Right. Tom, good to have you in studio. And what do you make out of the whole decision that was made by the ICC prosecutor, that is Fatou Bensouda?
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me on your show. It was a decision that was bound to be made. I think it took quite a long time because we are where we were a year ago. In December last year, Bensouda had said, look, I have evidence, but it's not going to meet the threshold that I'm required to satisfy. And I need something else that I'm expecting from the Kenyan government. And therefore, maybe after that is when I'll be able to make a clear decision. Once the judges said, look, we're not going to wait for that, decide whether you want to withdraw the charges or whether you want to go to trial, then she had no choice but to do what she did.
Right. And in case you are watching, our hashtag is Africa Speaks, and you can reach us via that hashtag. Tell us what your views are regarding the case of President Uhuru Kenyatta, knowing that he was charged as a private citizen then,
Yes.
or a normal, ordinary Kenyan citizen, and now he is the president of the Republic of Kenya. Do you think that that could have played part in the fact that, Kenya was not compliant in providing evidence in this case?
Okay, I have had that argument. In fact, I've had Bensouda, when Bensouda was withdrawing the case, she had a press statement. And I actually read through her press statement, and I read through the judge's decision. And I actually cannot see where she's getting her argument from. As far as I'm concerned, she's just spinning this issue. And I say this for the reason. In fact, I actually had highlighted it. In paragraph 52 of the judge's decision. It's very interesting. Just allow me to read it. More generally, the chamber also recalls its findings regarding the failure on the part of the prosecution to take appropriate steps to verify the credibility and reliability of evidence on which it intended to rely at trial. Being, in the chamber's view, the direct reason for the prosecution's evidence falling below the required standard at such a late stage. So this argument that the reason this case is collapsing is because the government did not cooperate. And that might actually have some substance. My problem is we tend to be focusing on that as the reason this case has collapsed, while we forget that when this case began, Uhuru was not president. When this case was confirmed, Uhuru was not president. In fact, this case has now, we are looking at a situation where he's been president for 1.5 years of a 5-year process with 3 years of those proceedings continuing. So if we are having a conversation about government refusing to cooperate, we've had also instances where the ICC has refused to allow the government to participate in hearings that it's had. And we also need to go to the very beginning, because sometimes I think as Kenyans we forget a lot. When these cases began, Ocampo, who was the prosecutor then, was very clear about not working with government. He actually took a decision not to work with government at the beginning of formation of these cases. He worked with NGOs, collected a lot of information from NGOs. He got witnesses from proscribed criminal groups, to the point where when the government said, we can protect your witnesses, he said, no, we don't trust you. There was a lot of mistrust between the prosecution and the government. And again, the judges actually pointed that out in their ruling, that that the prosecutor is actually using now, it's only very recently, like a year ago, when she now made the government cooperation a primary aspect of the cases continuing. When all the other things that she had, when her witnesses disappeared in whatever way they did, now it's when she converted her focus from witnesses and evidence to government cooperation. We need these documents, we need ABCD. So it's important for us, especially as Kenyans. She has the right to spin her argument the way however way she was, because she's going to have to live with the fact that she ran a case for 5 years and then had to withdraw it.
Right.
She has to live with that. So she's going to argue it. But as Kenyans, I think it's important for us to keep going back to where this case began, where the prosecution started cooperating with the government, at what point they did. So when they're arguing that government refused to cooperate, it's something that we're talking about that is very recent.
Right. Tom, let me come to you and let's talk about the post-election violence victims, the 2008 post-election violence victims. At this point in time, now that the case is closed and, Uhuru Kenyatta was accused of crimes against humanity. And for the post-election violence victims, what's next for them? Are there any other options that they can explore for them to get justice?
I think there are options for them to explore, but I think for them right now, especially those who were part of the case against Kenyatta, this is a time for them to be disappointed, for them to feel a sense of desperation. And I think it's important for them to go through that and then now decide what next they want to do. The government has said that it is interested in seeking justice for the victims. I guess the victims now can, through whatever avenues they choose, whether it's their representatives in parliament, whether it's petitions, whether it's whatever other means, the court process, getting petitions through the court, to force the government, to hold the government to account to what it has said it will do, which is provide justice for victims. Because the ICC cases only covered a small percentage of the victims of the post-election violence. There was a much larger group of victims who were never represented in those cases. And therefore, the question, even if the ICC cases had been concluded and reached, and the judges had issued their verdicts, there would still be a group of victims who would still be seeking justice.
Right. And, the ICC has accused Kenya of non-compliance, and the African Union, of course, is a place where President Uhuru Kenyatta sought a lot of support against the ICC. We are focusing on the case of President Uhuru Kenyatta that was dropped by the ICC Prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda. And according to the lawyer of the victims, he thinks that, this is unfair to the victims of post-election violence. And that is an issue that, of course, is of concern to a lot of Kenyans. But at this point in time, we can also not dispute the fact that there was not enough evidence to, come up with a comprehensive case that they could put against President Uhuru Kenyatta. But now, let us look at the African perspective. Tom, what do you think about the fact that, the African Union has been pushing for a lot of African countries to withdraw, even after signing the Rome Statute? But where does this leave us, knowing that this is the first sitting president who's charged at the ICC and whose charges have been withdrawn without even much effort from the African Union?
I think there are several things here. I think the African Union has had a two-track approach towards the ICC. The focus of the African Union resolutions has always been about heads of state, deputy heads of state. They have not talked about the rebel leaders who are facing cases at the ICC. There's no mention, for instance, of Joshua Rapsang. And it seems like the AU's approach is, don't touch our leaders, everybody else is fair game. And in terms of now the Kenya case and its impact on Africa, obviously there are those who had looked towards the ICC and said, maybe this is, in essence, the court of last resort. If you want justice as a victim of gross human rights violations, that is where you need to go. With the decision in the Kenyatta case, they'll have to rethink. And truth be told, the ICC was never going to deal with post-election violence cases in Kenya. It was only going to deal with a handful of them, and that was it. The onus was always on Kenya, us as a nation, to decide how we're going to handle these cases. And that remains the situation right now.
All right. And just before we can look at the responses or even hear from other people, we actually have responses from Dr. Masanga as well. And before we can get into what he has to say about this whole thing, what next for President Uhuru Kenyatta, Umbugu, I would like to know from you, in this case, we are looking at a situation where people don't know what next for them because they've always been hoping for some sort of justice. But then what happens now if there's no justice that is, given to them? At this point, it's just in the loop.
Before I answer that, I just want to make a quick point on the issue of African leaders. I agree with Tom to a large extent that the African leaders are focused entirely on the leadership and without thinking about the fact that they have Kony, some of them have taken Kony to ICC and stuff like that. But you see also, the African leaders are riding on a very interesting situation. They're demanding the same respect that first world countries get from the ICC. We have a situation where first world countries actually, where the ICC has a big problem, can't go after George Bush, can't go after Tony Blair, and on the argument that they were heads of state at that moment in time. That's not the argument, official argument they give, but they don't go after them. We've seen Assad kill hundreds of thousands, or be in charge of a regime that's killed hundreds of thousands of Syrians. We've seen Israel, we've seen Libya. So what the African leaders are saying, why are you treating us as if us guys are not leaders? We are elected by people just like you. So if you can have rules for some of the leaders where you can't go after them, then those rules need to apply to us. So that's the primary argument. Now, on the issue of the victims, I think one fallacy that has been propagated a lot, especially by some NGOs in the country, is that Kenyans, the post-election victims, are exactly where they were in 2008. I'm not saying that people who lost loved ones have gotten them back. I'm not saying that people who lost land have gotten it back or stuff like that. But then it's 7 years. And in 7 years, this country has moved quite a distance. At the same time, the victims I do not see how we can say that we have majority of the victims. I'm sure they still have some victims who haven't been able to move on or recover, and none of them can say they're at 100% of where they were before these atrocities happened to them. But we've had a progressive there's been progress. We've had the projects that government has done. Rudi Jumbani. We've had people being rehabilitated. For example, we had 118 camps as of February 2008 that had been profiled, that were profiled over the year of 2008. All of them have been closed. Everybody who was in those camps has been settled somewhere. Whether you've gone back home or you've gotten a piece of land, or you got 10,000 shillings.
What we're seeing right now is that the window for justice for the post-election violence victims seems to be closed at the moment. And we cannot trust, after us going to the International Criminal Court, we cannot trust that the local judiciary is going to, give justice.
It's because we're focusing on one type of justice.
Victims.
This is a problem we have. We're focusing on one type of justice. We're focusing on retributive justice. The only thing we keep talking about is who is going to get punished. Now, that is important. But at the same time, we also need to think about restorative justice. Has there been any effort to actually try and bring this situation back to a certain normalcy? And this is where I have a problem with the ICC. The ICC has a trust fund for victims. They've always had a trust fund for victims.
It goes beyond a trust fund. It goes beyond, the fact that they're living in poverty right now. It goes beyond all of that.
The point I'm trying to make,
what people are trying to look at is justice going to be served?
This is the point I'm trying to make. ICC has spent 5 years and a lot of resources going after 6 people, 6 Kenyans, right? And lost 3 of them. Now it's going down to the point where it's actually going to lose all these cases. At the same time, it has a trust fund, which even Kenya contributes into, that's supposed to help victims of cases that have been taken before them. They have never spent a single shilling of that trust fund on victims. So again, the focus has been retributive justice. They could have done something about restorative justice during these 5 years that they've been running these cases. They haven't done anything.
All right.
That is my problem.
Let's now take a look at what Dr. Masanga says. What next for the president now that the charges have been withdrawn? What exactly should he pay attention to? And I happen to have spoken to him yesterday, just before he left. He said he was going to the Assemblies of State. Exactly, in New York. But then I managed to catch him before he left and just take a look at what he said. What next for the president?
I appeal to the President of the Republic of Kenya to be calm, to celebrate as a family, but now to work as a president to heal, so that he can also resettle everybody, including the IDPs. Look at the victims. This is not the time for celebration. This is the time for unity, healing, reconciliation, because the people have died. At the end of the day, 1,300 people died. These are facts. The ICC took wrong suspects. These were not the ones who should be there. They were only selected by political opponents, and some of them enjoy a lot of privilege even around the president. No, not around the president, but around the parties. They are in the parties. They are in the party. They have now turned up to be very good queens and queens around there.
Dr. David Masanga also blames Moreno Ocampo for actually providing the wrong witnesses, and therefore that is why there was a lack of evidence in this case. But then we also have a lot of responses that are coming through, but before we can get into that, Tom, how do you think the media has covered the ICC cases ever since they were confirmed? The 4 cases were confirmed, I think, in January 2012.
I think the focus of the media has been to cover the cases as a political contest. You know, with things like naming the suspects when they originally were suspects as the Ocampo 6, presenting the cases as a battle between Luis Moreno Ocampo and the 6 individuals who had been taken before the ICC. And that has continued. Even today, the coverage is more focused on President Kenyatta, and yet post-election violence, there were victims. The victim story has been underplayed, has not been given the kind of attention or focus that it should be, because at the end of the day, the reason why there were cases at the ICC is because there were victims. It wasn't simply because there was a plot to get certain leaders out of the way. One may want to believe that, but they were actually victims in this case. And so I think that has been the failing of the media, not paying enough attention to that aspect of the cases. And also, strangely enough, there's a trial of Deputy President William Ruto and former journalist Joshua Rapsang ongoing. And the hearings go on every day. Throughout September, there was a hearing each day, except the weekends, of course. And it was easy to find for days on end no coverage at all, because there's other national news going on. And if the cases are what they're said to be, weak cases and so on and so forth, perhaps media managers should pay more attention to these cases, so their readers, their viewers, their listeners can be able to understand better, what's happening on a day-to-day basis, rather than, for instance, for some people, it came as a surprise that the case was dropped by the prosecutor. And yet, it was clear from December last year that this was going to happen. It was a question of when rather than if.
Yes. All right, now let's take a look at some of the responses coming in from you under the hashtag Africa Speaks. African Union Commission Chairperson Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma welcomes the decision by ICC to drop charges against President Uhuru Kenyatta and says President Kenyatta will now dedicate his time and energy to creating better life for the Kenyan people who elected him. Mutahi Ngunyi says now Uhuru must stand in solidarity with Ruto. He must defend Ruto as though the case was against him. This is the decent thing to do. Inspire, engage, motivate tweets. Withdraw of ICC case tells that African state machinery are clogged that can't be accountable, and that those who lost loved ones still want to know what happened now that Uhuru isn't guilty. Newton Jao says Kenya is ready to move on. We need to be working on reconciling all and not pointing fingers at a few people. Former presidential candidate Professor James Ole Kiapi says following the dropping of charges against him by the ICC, Uhuru should now lead the country as president and head of state without fail. Mwangi Masharia adds, like Ocampo promised, the ICC set an example that you can spend billions in coaching people and they still fail exams after 5 years. Dickens Nyamogo adds, hugest injustice to victims of post-election violence. Great relief to Uhuru and Fatou Bensouda has been allowed to restart the case afresh in future, that is maybe 2023. SVETS M1 is of the view that many celebrate his victory while many others mourn lives lost and traumatically changed. Kakande Alex from Uganda says it's a fundamental achievement Kenyans decided, and it's only Kenya that can sort any mess, if any, not the ICC. And one more, Collins Omuga adds, the case was a still bath. It was going nowhere, and now our police should investigate and tell us who did. And well, those are some of your views coming through. And also we're having one here coming in from Mate Tongola, who is saying the post-election violence victims should be given a promissory note by the state. Justice for one, justice for all, and that is under the hashtag Africa Speaks. Now, let's talk about the case of Deputy President William Ruto and Joshua Arap Sang, who is a journalist. What do you think? Do you think it's going to take the same seamless trend that we are seeing with President Uhuru Kenyatta's case, or it's going to turn out to be very different?
It will turn out to be different. First, simply because the trial has been ongoing for a year and 2 months now, or 3 months now, and therefore it is not at the point where the prosecutor can say, "I want to withdraw the charges." However, the prosecution is about to finish its case. It has a few more witnesses to present to the court. And the expectation is that will happen by, let's say, Easter next year. And after that, the court has asked the lawyers, the prosecution and defense and the victims' lawyers, to make submissions on whether there is a case to answer. Meaning, the judges have asked, can we call halftime and see whether the prosecution's case is strong enough that warrants the defense to actually present a defense, or whether the prosecution's case has failed to really come up with tangible evidence, and therefore we drop certain charges or drop certain things at this point and proceed forward. So that's what we're going to see next year as far as the trial of Ruto and Sang is concerned.
Right. And there's been the argument that the ICC Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda is from the Gambia, and so maybe it could have played part in the decision that she made, knowing that she inherited that position from Louis Moreno Campo, who probably just cooked up some witnesses and all that. So do you think that her being African had anything to do with the decision that she took?
I don't think it has anything specific. I mean, her being African has anything specific to do with the decision she took. I think she was just a lot more careful of a prosecutor than Louis. And I'm actually convinced that had it been her who had been in charge of this case from the beginning, I do not think would have gone this far with some of the cases. And I say that for this reason. When the argument that she keeps using, when she went last year in December and she told the court that I want an judgment because I don't have sufficient evidence to prove my case beyond reasonable doubt. That is not for her to actually decide. This is another point we are all missing. Prosecutors don't decide whether the evidence they have is beyond reasonable doubt. That is something you actually present to the court, and then the court decides that, no, you know what, you're not able to convince us beyond reasonable doubt. By the time a prosecutor is making that decision herself, her evidence is actually much lower, much lower than she's even presenting. That means when she took control of these cases, she realized, look, we actually don't have a process. Again, when the confirmation was being done, Ocampo was in charge, and there was this one number 4 witness which everybody got beaten up about by the judges, who had actually recanted, and that information was brought before the court officially during confirmation. Now, I have a feeling that had it been Bensouda, she would actually have walked away, the way she did with Mudaura. But I think she also got carried away with this issue of Uhuru being president. That to the point, because her arguments of withdrawing Mudaura's case are actually the exact same arguments she has been using with Uhuru's case, but she has not been willing to withdraw Uhuru's case. So you find that she argued that the government didn't cooperate. She argued that she had lost witnesses. She argued that something had been interfered with in her process with Mudaura's case. And without being asked by anybody, she withdrew the case. But then she's been making the same arguments on Uhuru's case. But instead of asking for a withdrawal, she's been asking for indefinite adjournment. So you get the impression that she did get carried away at some point. That could be where the African comes in and decide that, okay, this is a president, an African president. And being African, maybe you have this thing of impunity is really large in Africa. Maybe we actually do need to do something about this case.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, let's take some views from South Africa. And this one is coming in from Dorothy Ngila, who is in Cape Town.
When I heard of the withdrawal of the ICC charges against President Uhuru Kenyatta yesterday, there are 3 things that I thought about. First of all, I thought about the ICC image. I think that it's the ICC image has definitely been tampered with here. In my mind, there are a couple of questions that are to be asked. We know very well that there have been human atrocities that have been committed by leaders in the continent. We know very well that there are people who need to be brought to book because of the atrocities that they have committed. How then are we going to move forward in terms of making sure that these people are prosecuted? If the ICC has not been able to provide enough evidence that led to the withdrawal of these charges, if the ICC is not able to confidently tell us that we can prosecute leaders and people who feel that they can commit atrocities, then what do we do now? Secondly, for me, and in the words of the president, the ICC case has definitely been a distraction in terms of functioning of government, a distraction in terms of the president's own effort in terms of being a leader. And I think that it will be interesting to see now how having 100% commitment into the governance issues in the country and in trying to deal with the developmental challenges that we have, and also in trying to ensure that the manifesto that elected him into power is implemented, how this is going to change.
And that's a very critical, suggestion that she puts out there. What is going to change right now? And I think that is what Dr. David Masanga was also highlighting. The president has a duty now to unite Kenyans. But yesterday I was having a discussion with a group of lawyers, and one of them happened to have said that Fergal Gaina was the wrong lawyer to represent the victims of post-election violence. Tom, what do you think about that as we wind up?
I don't think so. I think he was a passionate lawyer. I think he really took this case to heart. It showed in the submissions he made. It showed in the representations he made whenever there were court hearings on the case. And I think if I was a victim, I would want a lawyer like that on my side. Mm-hmm. I know the two gentlemen may not like the comparison, but on the other side, on the defense side, you have a man called Karim Khan, who is equally passionate, who is equally assertive as a lawyer.
Right.
And I think, if you're somebody who has a case before a court, you want somebody who shows some sort of, interest in your case and argues vigorously on your side. I don't think you want somebody who is docile, who just sits back and lets the process take its course and rely on legal authorities to make their arguments. Mm-hmm. So in that case, I don't think he's a wrong lawyer. I think the problem is it's not even a question of whether Fergal Gaina was the right lawyer or not. I think the problem is the way the ICC has chosen to handle the issue of victims, because the ICC is one of the few courts in the world that has provisions for victims to be part of a case. They don't have a say in terms of evidence and things like that, mm-hmm. but their stories are supposed to be heard. The stories are supposed to be taken into account.
Right.
And if a case reaches its logical conclusion, then there's a question of reparations and so on. Mm-hmm. And in the Kenya case, what the ICC decided to do was have one lawyer represent hundreds of victims, thousands in this case, and that lawyer then was not given the resources required to manage his work in terms of meeting his clients, as it were, in terms of regularly updating them, in terms of where need be raise certain issues that concern them.
Mm-hmm. All right. As you wind up, Wambugu, I would like to know from you, what if the Deputy President and Arap Sang are found guilty? What happens? If you can, make that part of your final remarks.
Sorry, I really must say something about Fergal.
Very briefly.
I think Fergal was the wrong lawyer for these victims for the simple reason he didn't seem to understand Kenya at all. His understanding of the Constitution, saying that the president has the power to order Safaricom to give us documents, blah, 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 showed he did not understand how the Kenya Constitution works. But then on the issue of William Ruto and Joshua Apsang being found guilty, I think that is a situation that is going to suddenly cause political ripples in the country. It's going to be interesting now from now on, and I agree with Matanga on that point. That the argument and the defense that has been put forward for the president has to be pushed forward to the deputy president, because now from within The fight has been won outside. Now, Uhuru's fight from now on is for the hearts and minds of the people who support the deputy president. If there is a perception that he is not as committed to the case that the deputy president is involved in as he was to his, then he is going to suffer some political backlash. However, if he shows full commitment and they still get found guilty, then he will be fine, because even on this one, Kenyans were willing to accept that there is a possibility that he might be found guilty. So the issue is going to be entirely up to him and to this team. How do they proceed from here? Do they completely keep their foot on the pedal on their case, just as they have done for themselves?
Right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. It was such an honor having you in studio and also shedding some light on the case, of course, the withdrawal of President Uhuru Kenyatta's case for crimes against humanity. And the prosecutor said it was for lack of evidence, among other issues. And also, we are now looking forward to seeing how the deputy president's case and Arab Sang is going to turn out. And just like Tom mentioned, we're going to be seeing that at least by Easter time, that is next year. But thank you all for watching. The conversation continues online under the hashtag Africa Speaks. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. You can find me on Twitter as well, at Joy Doreen Bira. You can also use the Twitter handle at KTN Kenya. My name is Joy Doreen Bira once again. Have a good afternoon.